Hello, and thank you so much for joining us today for the Financing for Small Business Recovery. What's next? My name is Michelle Nellenbach. I am the Vice President for Strategic Initiatives here at the Bipartisan Policy Center. And it is my incredible privilege to be able to talk with Congressman Bill Foster this afternoon. For those who don't know, Congressman Foster is a scientist and businessman. He represents the 11th Congressional District of Illinois, a position he's held since 2013. He also represented the 14th Congressional District of Illinois from 2008 to 2011. He's the only PhD physicist in Congress. He serves on a number of really key committees, including House Financial Services, House Science, Space, and Technology Committee, where he is the chairman of the Science Committee's Investigations and Oversight Subcommittee. He began his career at 19 when he and his younger brother founded the Electric Theater Controls Incorporated, a company that now manufactures over half of the theater lighting equipment in the United States. Before he became a member of Congress, he worked as a high energy physicist and particle accelerator designer at Fermi National Laboratory. He was a member of the team that discovered the top quark, the heaviest known form of matter. He also led the teams that designed and built several scientific facilities and detectors still in use today. I didn't really understand much of what I just said, but gladly that he does and was able to succeed so much in his pre-congressional career. But I had the privilege of working with your office and you on energy R&D and artificial intelligence, and so now small business. So Representative Foster, welcome. It's a real honor to be chatting with you.
Well, happy to be here. You missed one small thing on my bio, though. Back when I was 23, I designed and programmed the control system for the Disneyland Main Street Electrical Parade. So
how can I miss that?
Well, I don't heavily advertise it. It's not clear that I don't have a non-disclosure agreement that's like 45 years old from Disney. But and they're usually pretty tough on enforcing those sort of things. But I think I'll probably, the statute of limitations may have been exceeded on that.
Yeah, I think they'll let that one pass. So the congressman does tweet at Rep Foster, and he, for our purposes today, we want to talk a little bit about small business and entrepreneurship. So let's start with COVID-19. We feel like we keep getting close to coming out of it. We're not quite there yet. Can you tell us about the experiences of small business and entrepreneurs in your district over the past 18 months, and how are they coping?
Well, there's been a huge spread in experiences. Some were, not tremendously impacted. The ones where their employees could work at home without a lot of disruption, their efficiency hasn't gone down much. Places with their direct consumer contact, like restaurants, there was also a big split. Some of them found it essentially impossible to do business, and many of them did not survive. Others made the transition to just takeout, and some of them were actually more profitable during the peak of the COVID crisis than they had been previously. And so it depends tremendously on exactly what your line of business is and how quickly you're able to respond. And also, I'm very proud that lots of them were saved by the emergency government intervention. It was something that Congress, we get beaten up from all directions all the time, but that's something on a bipartisan basis we should be proud of forever, and hopefully get some credit for. So that's usually too much to ask for in politics.
Well, we at BPC do think y'all should get more credit for the positive steps you take. So let's talk a little bit about that. So the federal government, as you alluded to, has provided a lot of assistance to small business to help through the pandemic. What else do you think Congress might need to do to help them through the recovery?
Well, I was very struck recently by the way that if you looked at the PPP program, some of the most effective providers were fintech. And in fact, there was some evidence that fintech providers were more effective than banks in some areas, particularly for minority-owned businesses. And so I think that that's something where we have to make sure that we're doing everything we can to support the use of technology by small businesses in a very lightweight manner. A big part of that is something that our office is been working on for years now, which is to try to do a better job of getting a secure digital ID in the hands of all Americans. This is something very involved with the broadband expansion that has strong bipartisan support. Just basically providing a guarantee for all Americans, no matter how what their financial situation is, that they will have access to at least a basic internet connection, basic broadband connection, and a low-end device. With that, if bundled with that is one of these mobile driver's licenses or mobile IDs, then you have a mechanism for a person to prove who they are online in a way that's very difficult to engage in fraud with. And so that is, one of the real small businesses are one of the real victims of identity fraud. And in countries where they've done a better job of providing a secure digital ID, it's been transformative in making that so it's not something that you have to spend as much money defending yourself against, and you don't have as much, it is many tens of billions of dollars every year of losses from identity fraud, and that by providing, and this is something the states actually have gotten ahead of the federal government on in rolling out these mobile IDs. States like Arizona, Louisiana, Oklahoma, surprising set of states are actually leading the way on this. And you see huge advantages when you have to qualify, for example, for a federal program. The first step is to prove you are who you say you are and not some fraudster. One of the reasons why it took so long to get a lot of these programs rolled out is that they were obvious targets for fraud. There has been a lot of fraud, and a lot of that fraud would not happen in the future if we have a better job of authenticating who we are. And so that's something where government provided standards are going to be really a very crucial aspect of. So happy to go into more on that if it's of interest.
Well, as the person who also oversees our technology project, it's of great interest to me. And I mean, I got 3 phishing attempts on my personal email already today. So there is certainly a need for something like that. And it would absolutely help small businesses, as you had mentioned. I am curious about.
So Representative Katko and I are co-sponsors of legislation that will encourage states to widely deploy these mobile IDs, digital driver's licenses. And so they're really, and also encourage the government to use this, because everyone's frustrated. And it happens not only with the government, we all know the experience of going into some new medical clinic, and you have to go and fill out these forms with a bunch of information that you already know is on 8 different computers. And the government actually has been a bad actor in that. For the last 25 years, it's been illegal for the providers of electronic health records to get together and get a unique identifier for patients who want one. So you can't go in there and say, here's the proof that I am who I am, please, and here is the authorization to collect medical records from everyone who's holding them on me. And with that sort of, countries that have that kind of mechanism, even when they have multiple medical providers in a free market, have a much easier time avoiding preventable medical errors. And that's something also where we've had real progress on. My bipartisan co-conspirator in that is Representative Kelly of Pennsylvania, who's probably, he's about as far right as most people that you can name. So he and I agree on very few things, but we do agree that we have to raise our game in preventing identity fraud. And so this is something where we've, over the last few years, gone from where we proposed an amendment that went down in flames to passing with a bare majority, passing unanimously, and now it's actually in the base text of the relevant legislation. And we're just waiting for the Senate to do its job. And because this will be, it'll make your experience as a patient much better and prevent, by some estimates, over 100,000 preventable medical errors a year. Should be important in lowering the cost of health insurance as well, which is a huge issue for small business.
Well, we will definitely have to have you come back to talk about digital ID and reducing healthcare costs. We have really large projects in both areas. I did want to circle back a little bit and see, are those topics that so you're co-chair of the Bipartisan Entrepreneurship Caucus. It sounds like those might be topics of interest to the caucus. What else are they working on?
Yeah, well, we touch on that, actually, the digital identity part, as part of the hat that I wear as the head of the Financial Services Task Force on Artificial Intelligence. Because the big data sets that are necessary for for artificial intelligence to work well depend on having understood access to data on individuals. And at the heart of that is having a secure digital identity, so that you can control your privacy and still give access to relevant data. So that's a very important aspect of that as well.
Great. So small businesses obviously are huge drivers of economic growth, big employers. While some small businesses have been struggling a lot to come through COVID, as you said, we've seen a number of closures, particularly in the service sector and restaurants. All you have to do is walk through the streets of DC and you can see the number of restaurants that have struggled or did not come back. But new business creation has been running at record levels for over a year now. What's your take on that surge in entrepreneurial activity?
Well, I think it's our economy getting off the couch and getting moving again. And that's, I think, the best way I've heard it explained. That this is really, a lot of people have been daydreaming about starting their own business. They had a lot of time on their hands during COVID lockdown, and they realize now it's time. There are a lot of stories about I think the record number of people quitting their jobs. And, that's not good news if you're an employer and a key employee decides they want to head off and start a new business. But in the long term, it's good for our economy. And I think we're also having a better attitude as a country about startups, because they're really, I view them, at least psychologically, as two very different things. There's something where you have a brand new idea that is going to change the world. And there's something where a successful business and you just want to be kind of like that, maybe in your local community. And most of the small businesses are that second kind. I guess the one I started was the first kind, where my little brother and I had this bright idea of using the newly invented microprocessor to control theater lights, which hadn't been done before. And so that was the germ of an idea. And so we had a sort of, traditionally famous whole new technology disrupting an industry. But that's not what most startups are, and not really what they should be. It's someone who wants to just start a restaurant, or you name it, a new plumbing outfit, not necessarily something that's a new business model at all, but just needs assistance, needs to understand that the market is ready for that in the area that they're trying to do it. And I think that there are a lot of the groups that have stood up to encourage that activity deserve a lot of credit for the blooming of this, because people during lockdown have sat on the internet and saying, let's see, how do I go about starting a small business? And they're pretty good assets out there, from the small business, from groups like SCORE, a long list of groups that feel they exist to help small businesses get started. And if you go through their checklist and your business plan survives their checklists, then you have a pretty good chance of actually making it surviving, thriving. So one of my predictions is that the famous number of the probability of a small business startup to survive being, for even a couple of years, is like less than 50%, that probability may be going up because of the high quality assistance that is now provided online for people considering starting up businesses. I know when the SBA comes and talks to us, one of the things they're most proud of is the businesses that don't start after consultation with them, that they just point out, there actually are already 8 donut shops on the same block that you're trying to add another donut shop, and maybe you want to consider locating elsewhere or selling something else. And so I think this is very valuable, and we may have a higher success rate for startups. Well, stay tuned.
Well, I certainly hope so. And you kind of point to another a bright side of the last 18 months is people have gotten very entrepreneurial. And as you noted, it has also highlighted the internet gap, which I'm glad to hear that you are focused on. So Congressman, we are going to launch a task force today that's talking about modernizing the Small Business Administration. You alluded to them just now. What thoughts do you have on the SBA and its role, and what else it might be doing for new and young small companies?
Well, I think that if the government did a better job of having a good online interaction with people, because most of the entrepreneurs that are going to be important are younger people that are perfectly comfortable interacting digitally. And what they need is to say, here is exactly how you plug in, how you instead of a bunch of opaque paperwork to start a business, you actually have good, easy to use and clear online resources. I think that will be transformative because there's a lot of enthusiasm on both sides of the aisle to lend a helping hand to small businesses, and so that is done most efficiently online. Like I say, I was very impressed by the indication that fintechs were more effective at providing PPP loans than many traditional banks for small businesses, and particularly minority-owned businesses. And I think that's a reflection of just how efficient our system can be.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. You certainly pointed that small business help and is a bipartisan issue. Members of Congress both really rally around the nation's small businesses. And so I appreciate the work you're doing there in Congress with the Entrepreneurship Caucus and the legislation you've introduced. So thank you, Congressman, for joining us. And I'm now going to turn this over to my colleague, Dane Stengler, who's going to introduce our panel.
Thanks, Michelle. And thank you very much, Congressman Foster, for your time, for your comments and your insights. We're going to transition to a panel discussion. We have a terrific lineup today. I want to remind the audience that you can submit questions through the live chat function on YouTube or on Twitter using the hashtag BPC Live. I have 4 stellar panelists today. Following our insightful and provocative discussion, please stay tuned for a special announcement about the task force that Michelle mentioned. Before we get to introducing each of you and your organizations, I want to start with a quick lightning round. I'm going to go around to each of you. Jamal, I'm going to start with you. In 30 seconds or less, what do you think is the biggest challenge facing American small businesses right now?
Probably finding employees. We're in a tight labor market, and I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges that a lot of small businesses are facing. In addition to access to capital.
I think a lot of data supports both those things, especially workforce. Chris Ledesma, 30 seconds or less, biggest challenge.
The fact that right now there's so many different challenges, I think, is the biggest challenges for small business. And with the pandemic and with the workforce issue that Jamal just brought up, I think there's unprecedented challenges for small business today. And so I'm pleased to hear what the small business owner who's on the agenda has to say as well. So we're learning every day.
Fair point. A meta challenge. Chris Pilkerton.
Dane, I think it's post PPP. What's next? Right. I agree with what Jamal and Chris were saying. And that doesn't necessarily mean grant programs, but how are local communities going to partner with federal and state to really get access to capital for those businesses? So whether it's through the regional programs like California Rebuilding or New York Forward or Southern Opportunity and Resilience, are there going to be new and innovative ways to help those businesses?
Well, we have the advantage, as you've already mentioned, of having a small business owner on our panel today. Angela, now before we talk about your business, you just heard your other panelists talk about their take on the biggest challenges facing small businesses. What about you? What's the biggest challenge your business is facing today?
Thank you. So we are one of those businesses that was forced to reinvent ourselves. We had to create a completely different business model to survive. And so I would say our biggest challenge is that we underestimated how difficult it would be to move into a different customer market after our pivot. So right now we're not close to our pre-pandemic revenue numbers. And this is probably my biggest challenge at the moment.
So Angela, thanks for that. And I think you're certainly not alone in that challenge. If we look at some of the census data, talk to us about Trapezium Math. Give us a little context around that challenge, reinventing yourself, and some sense of your journey as an entrepreneur.
Sure. So Trapezium Math, we were a hyper-local small business pre-pandemic with a brick and mortar storefront. We provided math enrichment to children in grades K to 5 for after school and summer camps. And also, I also did work with schools and professional development around math education. The pandemic, we closed our doors on March 13th of 2020. And by the summer, it was clear that we couldn't continue. And so I negotiated out of my lease and we closed our brick and mortar business on July 1st of 2020. We thankfully got PPP loan and EIDL, otherwise we would be completely out of business. And I had laid off my staff. I was able to keep them probably through the end of March, and then I had to lay them off. I was able to bring them back, and we had to kind of reinvent our model. And if you had come to our math club space pre-pandemic, there were no tables and chairs. We're very hands-on. Our ethos was entirely technology free. So having to embrace technology with this belief of really engaging hands-on math learning was a challenge for us. And we spent the summer doing focus groups with students and coming up with a model. And what we came up with is sending families a kit. That this is what the kit looks like, a kit that their students could use to do math. And we tell parents the only technology they need is a Zoom camera and audio and nothing else. We are very technology free. So pre-pandemic, we were hyper local. Post-pandemic, we now have students from 15 states in math club, and we have math clubs for all grade levels. So that's been a really wonderful. And if you had told me that my business would take that path, that direction, I would not have believed it. So, we're very optimistic, but like I said at the beginning, we're not at our pre-revenue numbers, and really it's causes sleepless nights for sure.
And you certainly are not using the term reinvention lightly at all. It's a radical, serious reinvention.
Radical, right.
Chris Pilkerton, tell us about Accion Opportunity Fund. What is it? What do you do?
So Accion Opportunity Fund is a community development financial institution, more commonly known as a CDFI. And it's funded through a number of sources, but the main fund is a program at Treasury called the Cdfi Fund. That, coupled with philanthropy, CDFIs provide capital in a whole host of areas, whether it's small business, housing, a number of different areas. And we focus at AOF on small business. The CDFI has been around for about 25 years, and it's headquartered in California. But we're loaning in 46 different states with a particular focused mission on underserved communities, so particularly communities of color and women. We provide capital, but also business advising services. So we work hand in hand with a number of large corporations, both from a philanthropic role, but also help administer some of their programs associated on the business advising side. It's been a tremendous growth organization over the last few years. And we work hand in hand with a lot of the large financial institutions to ensure that those underserved communities that may not be walking into some of the large or local banks are getting that capital to be able to start small businesses.
Thanks, Chris. And there's a couple of things you said in there that I hope we can kind of dig into as we get further into the discussion. But Jamal, with the American Investment Council, tell us about it. Tell us how your members are involved in small business finance.
So the American Investment Council is the leading resource and advocacy association for the private equity and private credit industries. And so our members are financing small businesses in a variety of ways. One way is obviously the traditional equity financing that we provide. In fact, a research study we did recently found out that approximately 86% of private equity-backed businesses would qualify as small, on the smaller side, or small businesses. And the other side that our members do is a lot of debt financing. So many of our members operate business development companies and also have direct lending funds, as well as venture debt funds, which provide financing to a wide array of businesses, but particularly those that are small and medium sized.
Jamal, AIC released a report this past spring, I think, on private credit markets and small business finance. Can you talk a little bit about the terms and the findings from that report?
Yeah, so in March of this year, we released a report which basically detailed all of the new strategies that a lot of asset managers have started to employ, particularly on the credit side. In particular, direct lending and BDCs are the most relevant, I think, to the conversation today. But we found, as regulatory shifts in the aftermath of the financial crisis, that more and more business loans are coming from non-bank lenders, and particularly credit vehicles that were set up to lend to these businesses by private equity firms or asset managers.
Thanks, Jamal. Chris Ledesma, come to you now. I think most people in the audience will be familiar with Wells Fargo as a bank, as an institution, but give us some insight into the bank's involvement in kind of the small business financing landscape.
Sure, and it's great to hear about all the other organizations too. Probably the most well known in what we do, but from a Wells Fargo perspective, through our branch systems and the local branch bankers to our business banking and middle market teams, they all serve small businesses of all sorts. And I think that's where Wells Fargo, how we work with our small business customers every day. We provide traditional lines and loans to those who specialize in maybe equipment or in certain types of uses or certain types of industries. That's us on a broad scale. But part of what I'm here today, I think, representing Wells Fargo, is one of our key strategies has been around SBA lending. And we've been a leader in SBA lending for the past dozen years or so. And it's been a part of what we do. We try to provide 7(a) and 504 loans, which are the core programs. Also, their SBA Express program. We've been doing that for a number of years and have been a national leader. And I think that's part of our, our overall strategy, is try to serve our Main Street customers across the country and communities to help them grow their businesses, from very small businesses to larger small businesses that may need a larger project and hire a lot of people in their community. I think that's where Wells Fargo our strategy is to provide for as many small businesses as possible.
Thanks, Chris. I definitely want to hear more from all of you, especially AOF and Wells Fargo, about the state of things, what new things you're trying to do in terms of small business finance. But I want to ask first, and Chris Ledesma, I'll come back to you first. I want to start, before we get to what's next on the frontier, what's next on the horizon. I want to ask you about something that I know a lot of our audience members are curious about, and that's this idea, or these proposals that have been introduced in Congress for direct lending from the SBA. In my experience, we talk casually about SBA loans, and I think a lot of people in our audience are curious as to how these proposals for SBA direct lending, how they will kind of relate or fit in, if they become law, to the current state of things. So, Chris Ledesma, starting with you, can you just give us a sense of what's being proposed here, and how is it different from the current state of things? Walk our audience through where this fits.
Oh, yeah, it's a great question, and certainly has the attention of a lot of people around the country that are involved in SBA lending, us included. But I think to start, there's maybe a misnomer, and maybe the pandemic and COVID and the CARES Act and PPP have helped erase some of the myths around SBA lending. The SBA doesn't actually make a lot of direct loans to business on a regular cycle. Lenders and banks do. And the current state is banks will today get a guarantee from the federal government through the SBA back a loan that we make to a small business. And that's the current state of things. So a direct lending program proposal that's out there would in essence allow the SBA to make loans directly. Now, honestly, I don't think the program, the role making hasn't occurred. We're not quite clear on what the program would look like or how it would fit in. I think there's a lot of questions around that. But I think more importantly, where we're coming from is we're going to approach this and engage this from a place of understanding about what the need is, about where there's issues on access to capital and where this might fit in, and to make sure we from our perspective, I think our customers and from how we serve our customers throughout the bank system, we try to care for them from small to large, and I think they may be trying to get to that area of small business that's smaller, that maybe through the SBA programs is a little harder to do, and for banks it's typically more expensive to do small loans, and I think that's an area where the SBA and policymakers are trying to address. So I think the devil's in the details, Dane. I think that's what we'll learn as this evolves. And like I said, we're going to approach it and engage this from a space of understanding and trying to understand the need and see if this is complementary and ask questions about how it may impact the larger programs in general.
Thanks, Chris. You answered that with remarkable clarity. Thanks for laying out the landscape there. Chris Pilkerton, I want to come. Do we still have Chris? I think we're having some technical issues. So Jamal, now we get to come to you since Chris gets to skip this particular question. I'm just curious as to how AIC is viewing this again, just in terms of helping our audience understand how some of these proposals and others, for what the SBA might do, kind of fit into the current landscape. But you already talked about how you're seeing with your membership a lot of innovation, a lot of diversification across product areas for small business finance.
Well, I think this, having the SBA make direct loans could only be complementary to some of the work that we're doing, and I think it would also help to get loans to some of the smaller businesses that it's not quite as easy to finance, like Chris mentioned. I think also, there's some disparities in lending, obviously, along race and ethnicity that could help be alleviated by the SBA stepping into this space.
Thanks, Jamal. Angela, you mentioned toward the beginning that your business did receive a PPP loan, an economic injury disaster loan, an EIDL, and that they helped you stay afloat. So you have experience receiving not only one of the loan guarantees that Chris Ledesma outlined, but also one of the few areas where SBA has engaged in some direct funding on the disaster front. So can you tell us more about that experience? And you said that those were crucial to helping your business survive. Talk us through the process, the experience of applying, and what might come next.
Sure. We would not be in business were it not for PPP and the EIDL. And I had a very positive experience working with the SBA and was really impressed, with how quickly they were able to stand up this program for small business owners. I also am just very used to being on a computer and being able to log in and being able to handle all of that fairly easily. But the process was surprisingly seamless for us and really came at such a critical time, and it allowed us to really make the pivot that we would be out of business. And I will say that till my grave, the SBA saved us, truly.
That's good to hear, and I think everyone on this panel and in our audience knows the effort and the investments that SBA has made across multiple administrations to improve technology. And Chris Pilkerton, of course, used to be at SBA, and I know he put a lot of effort into that as well. I want to toss in an audience question. Reminder, if you're in the audience, you can use the hashtag BPC Live on Twitter or the live chat function on YouTube. But I'm going to read a question now. This will be for the group. This is from Latricia Boone at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And Latricia asks, considering what we learned about how the pandemic affected small businesses, particularly minority-owned firms, what would each of you say is the biggest insight or the greatest opportunity that small businesses should consider and leverage to evolve their business models as they recover and emerge from this crisis? Angela, I'll go to you. This is something you've already touched on. What lessons are you applying, and what would you tell other small businesses?
Wow, there are so many. I think one of the smartest things that I did prior to the pandemic was develop a relationship with a community bank. You know, we again didn't have a lot of the challenges that many small businesses have, because we had a relationship with a small bank that knew who we were, knew our challenges, and were able to kind of step in when it was necessary. So that, I think, was the biggest benefit of a lesson that I learned prior to the pandemic.
Thanks, Angela. Jamal, to Latricia's question, what, you know, if you were going to talk to small business today, you have a small business with you on the screen, you know, what kinds of insights, what kinds of opportunities would you encourage them to look for, to apply as they try to evolve, you know, try to reinvent themselves?
Well, I think leveraging technology is certainly extremely important for any business, but particularly for small businesses. And as we think about the pandemic, you know, technology was an important part of keeping us connected and making sure that you could serve your customers, and at least you know, market to your customers, given that a lot of stores were closed and people were not out and convening as much as they have in other instances. And I think the other thing is to make sure that your supply chains are intact and that you have alternatives, because I think one thing that we found through the pandemic is that you know, everything is so global, and you know, we can see with the semiconductor shortage and a bunch of shortages and other resources, masks early in the pandemic, that you need to make sure that your supply chains are intact and that you have alternatives to make sure that you can continue to serve your customers' product.
Yeah, that's a great point. Oh yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, may I just add to that, because you know, Jamal said something that was very clear. The technology piece was really big, and the fact that we had to lean on technology so much to do our pivot was critical. And you know, there's no going back, I don't think, for any business. That technology affords so much more for small businesses, and I have to concur with that piece.
That's a great point. I mean, we've heard so many people observe, you know, if this pandemic had happened 10 years ago, 15 years ago, there's who knows what we would have done or not done. Chris Ledesma, lessons, insights, opportunities for the small businesses that Wells Fargo is serving, or that you take away from this?
First of all, I acknowledge what Angela said. No one's going back. I mean, the necessity is the mother of all invention. We all had to kind of pick up and figure out how to continue to do loans, whether it was the regular kind of lending we do, or the CARES Act PPP program. We had to figure that out with people at home. And so, yeah, it was a necessity, and we'll learn from it. And I think that's one of the takeaways from that, is how we can better leverage technology going forward, how we can work more closely with the SBA, who also got an injection of technology to support those efforts, and how we can better reach small businesses. But I think our biggest takeaway has been what maybe Angela even alluded to, is that her and other business owners need to adapt to a changing environment. And what the Congressman brought up earlier is just the abundance of resources that are needed at this time for technical assistance, for helping businesses maneuver through this once in a lifetime, once in a generation type event, and then also to learn more about the business and be credit ready. So when it is time to get capital from any firm, not just ours, are they ready to do that? And I think that's what we learned. We've always sort of known and tried to work with partners in our community, even competitors, about how to best reach and have outreach to small businesses. And I think I know Chris Pilkerton isn't here, but you know, we've even helped to fund those other nonprofits through our philanthropy strategy, and our Open for Business Fund is a way to ensure that technical assistance and also other forms of credit are available, where, you know, one bank can't reach it all. We recognize that, but we got to support the ecosystem, support the effort, so that in short, we can all help the communities, because that just makes the community stronger. So that's our takeaways. We got to be more in our community than ever before.
Thanks, Chris. So building on that, I was going through some of the recent small business pulse surveys that the Census Bureau initiated during the pandemic and has kept up, and a very great source of insight. And in there, it asks small businesses, a very large sample but it asks the small business respondents about their biggest future needs. And the top three over the last, I think, 2 months or several weeks have been that they need to identify and hire new employees. I think a couple of you have already mentioned that. They say they want to increase marketing or sales, and they want to identify, or they need to identify, new supply chain options. So all three of those clearly reflect challenges, but they also give an indication of small businesses wanting to grow, wanting to recover. Like they're ready to take advantage of new opportunities. And even, Angela, if they're like you and they're still not yet back to their pre-pandemic levels, they're optimistic. They are looking forward. So Angela, start with you. What you've talked about reinvention, you've talked about trying to get back to that pre-pandemic level, but what's your outlook and orientation, right at this moment, kind of as we're in that weird transition period between still the crisis and recovery?
I'm very optimistic. This was kind of a forced pivot, but prior to the pandemic, like I said, we were a hyper local program, and the only scaling that I actually had seen was opening another brick and mortar. But we are now, because of technology and because of this pivot, we are scalable in a way that wasn't possible pre-pandemic. So I'm very much looking forward to that. But I agree. One of the benefits for us, which is unfortunate, is that many schools lost teachers after the pandemic because they just were burned out, and we are benefiting from that workforce who wants to stay home. And so we are one of the businesses that isn't having a problem finding employees, but unfortunately to the detriment of schools. So I think I touched on two of those.
No, that's a really good point too. And you're forcing us to look at this not just as an issue for specific challenges that individual businesses or sectors are facing, but then the reallocation implications and what that means for businesses like yours, both to leverage and to take advantage of. Jamal, how are you looking at this what's your forward-looking orientation? What are you thinking? How is our AIC and its members thinking about helping small businesses, helping those young companies recover and grow?
Well, I think, there's plenty of examples. During the current pandemic, one of the things that we found is that private equity companies worked with their portfolio companies, meeting with them daily, making sure that they had access to capital, whether drawing down revolving lines of credit or making equity injections or new loans to those businesses. I think, there's a number of ways that our members are doing it. For example, business development companies, one piece of their business model is to actually help the businesses that they loan to develop their business model and expand their business lines, and to look at new areas where they can start to expand to. And so I think from our perspective, one of the benefits of our members is that they have a wide array of businesses that they own, and so they have experiences in a wide array of sectors, and I think that they can help to bring that experience into the businesses that they invest in and help them to grow under all sorts of circumstances.
Thanks, Jamal. I want to now turn that same question to Chris Ledesma. Chris, you've already talked about Wells Fargo approaching small business support, small business finance with a wide lens, thinking about not just the businesses, but the communities. I wonder how's the bank thinking about a recovery? What needs to happen? Do new things need to happen? What needs to change to help those small businesses who want to grow, grow and thrive, and not just kind of sustain and survive?
Yeah, I think that's the $1 million question, Dane. I think we're all sitting back watching our communities and business owners continually adapt as to the changing circumstance. And I think what we can do as the lending community is dig into some of these issues of what has been for us internally. How can we learn from the pandemic? How can we learn about how we offer credit, where we make it available, how we reach more small businesses, what kind of credit needs they need? This is the time you dig in and you fortify those, you strengthen those, you look at your policies, procedures, make sure we have all the right procedures going on, but making sure more so that we're reaching the people that need to be met. And I think that's one of the things we're focused in on here for small businesses. It's for us, we see the challenge of what Angela brought up earlier. This is now what, Angela, 18 months, whatever it's been, where businesses have a reduced cycle of revenue. And that reflects on balance sheets, that reflects in financial statements that we're going to look at some point when you need credit to come through. And I think that's part of what, as the lending community, we were trying to understand, trying to figure out how we can look at underwriting and make it look at the larger picture, look at whatever else we can to help small businesses get through that. And I think that's why we kind of continue to point to small businesses having access to technical assistance, to having access to other resources to help them through that, right? I always say credit, when you take a picture of somebody needs credit because they're trying to grow. And make no mistake, right now, rates are still historically low. There's opportunity there for businesses, but that picture in time, and when they look at credit is sort of where they are. It's the build up to that. Are they doing all the right things to fortify revenue, manage expenses, make the right investments so that they have the opportunity to grow? And then when they get to us, we're ready to go, and or any one of our partnering or our fellow lenders and institutions. So I think it's going to be a way for the communities, both communities, to sort of re-engage each other and figure out and get through the recovery together. We're all going to learn through it, I think.
Thanks, Chris. I like how you put that, when small businesses are looking for credit, it, is usually an indication they're looking to grow.
Mm-hmm.
We've been rejoined by Chris Cokerton. Chris, welcome back. Apologies for your technical difficulties, but I want to do it. Yeah, I get to bless you with a 2-for-1 here. I'd like to ask you, I want to ask you this question that your fellow panelists have just been discussing about, not just small businesses struggling to make it through the pandemic. We heard about Angela and her reinvention of the business, and wanted to ask you about what you're seeing, what AOF is seeing and doing to help those small businesses who now want to recover and grow. What needs to happen for them. But I do want to also give you an opportunity to comment on. We talked about the direct lending ideas that have been put forth, and Chris Ledesma kind of laid out the landscape, how that would change, and Angela talked about her experiences with EIDL and PPP, and Jamal talked about how that fits into the landscape. So I do want to give you an opportunity to comment on that, and specifically where CDFIs fit into the current landscape, and how any direct lending might affect that current landscape. So sorry, 2 big questions in one for you.
No, absolutely, and sorry about that on my end, but. When it comes to sort of what innovations are going to be happening with small businesses, there's always going to be the market and regulatory influences. There's no doubt about that. And I agree with Chris, working with borrowers, the business advising is incredibly important, examining the credit box. But I think also looking at where there are market opportunities and what those barriers to entry are. And I'll give you an example. An area that we're very active in is the trucking loan sector. And the trucking business has picked up dramatically over the course of the pandemic because things have been delivered in places and people need to get those goods. But with the supply chain issues, you're seeing older trucks are in the market for independent small business truckers. So we've been innovative in the sense that we've been offering warranties with those loans because some of those trucks are older. So looking at where those opportunities lie and being able to sort of take advantage of those opportunities, like entrepreneurs do in everyday life. So I think we've seen a lot of that, and we'll continue to kind of look at our products to make sure that they're applicable to what's happening in the market opportunities. One thing that we're looking at is, construction loans around what will ultimately presumably be some level of an infrastructure package, and what will that look like? So with respect to direct lending, I think, taking a step back from the conversation and examining what the highest and best use of the SBA is. Having served at the SBA, I think first and foremost, you've got an amazing career staff that work there. They were obviously pushed to the limits when it came to PPP, working incredibly long hours, across the board for the American people. And I think when you're looking at SBA, there's some very specific questions that you have to consider. Is direct lending, within the authorities of the SBA? How will that change private sector engagement if at all, any kind of unintended consequences of that? Does the technology at SBA allow for that direct lending? I mean, obviously there was, as the congressman was mentioning, there was a bunch of new lenders that came in that were utilized, and really looking at the resources, both technology as well as human capital, that are available to support that direct lending. And then the last piece I would say is, what will it mean for underserved populations? You know, from a CDFI perspective, that's the area that we're particularly focused on. Will this direct lending, you know, if in fact it does happen, will that get to the groups that need it the most? So I think looking at that entire ecosystem of questions is incredibly important.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for addressing those two big questions. We've only got a few minutes left, and then we're going to transition to our discussion with Chris and Chris about the task force. So I want to kind of go into some quick questions here. We do have an audience, another audience question from Adam Zaki. I hope I'm saying that correctly, from DBank Magazine. Adam asks about non-bank finance's role in small business lending in the future, specifically the role of fintech. We heard Congressman Foster talk about fintechs and the research that's been done around that. So I want to use that question. Jamal, I'm going to start with you, then Chris Ledesma, come to you, then Chris Pilkerton, then Angela. I'd really love to get your reaction to what everyone kind of says here. I want to use Adam's question in terms of, you know, non-bank finance clearly already plays a role in the small business lending market. Fintechs, we saw that pre-COVID, we saw that during PPP. Jamal, you know, that's clearly an innovation. It's something exciting that's happening. What excites you the most right now in the small business financing market?
Well, I mean, I think one thing that's really exciting to me is that, particularly from our members, is that a lot of our members are able to offer bespoke financing options. I think that's one of the benefits. They're able to work with their portfolio companies and look at their cash flows and kind of figure out if and how they're able to provide those loans. So I think one thing, particularly for non-banks, is that some of them are able to offer some bespoke financing options that might not be available. So I think they overall, they're a complement to the traditional bank financing. And I think that in turn increases access to credit for a wide variety of borrowers.
Chris Ledesma, you are obviously at a more of a traditional bank. Mm-hmm. How does Wells Fargo approach innovation here, especially when there's so much innovation going on in other parts of the market?
Well, I think it's influenced us. It can't help but to, right? It's interesting. You look at the SBA, 7A rankings, for instance, as a meter, which is, you get some reporting, and we're lucky enough and worked hard to be in the top 10 for a number of years. But you look at who's there now and who was there 5 years ago. They're totally different entities, right? They're non-bank entities. They're fintechs to some degree. There are others that have entered the space using, to some degree, technology. And I think that's been good for customers. It certainly influenced us in our trajectory. And what excites me most is we're starting to step into some innovation. We have active projects going on in our space to help deliver loans in a much more easier way. And I think that's one of the areas that it's influenced us the most. It's, competition will do that in the markets where you're allowed to do that. And I think the other area too is it's showing us easier ways, or I should say more accessible ways to get to access capital. I think that's one of the big takeaways we had. We talked about earlier about the after effects of the pandemic. That's a real exciting thing for us. And how can we better deliver credit across the board, especially in the small, newer business sector? That's going to be our focus.
Pilkerton, you've already talked about the role of CDFIs and the very interesting place they occupy in the landscape. We know there's already some partnerships between fintechs and CDFIs around the country. We've got this question about non-bank finance, but what excites you the most right now in terms of, kind of the frontier of small business financing?
I think the most exciting thing that I've seen that's been incredibly impactful, and I alluded to it earlier, are the true public-private partnerships that are happening out there. It's a buzzword in DC, public-private partnerships, but it's actually happening in a lot of different areas. So I talked about the California Fund and the New York Forward Fund, where you've got philanthropic capital coupled with state capital, as well as, business capital. And then you're allowing some of the smaller CDFIs and some of the non-banks to be out there and actually lend directly into those communities where the folks that they actually have the handshake relationship. And there's one that's particularly interesting out there that I mentioned before called SOAR, the Southern Opportunity and Resilience Fund. And that starts as far west as Texas and goes up through the mid-Atlantic. And these regional partnerships are incredibly important because at the end of the day, getting the money into the hands of those entrepreneurs is what we're all trying to do. And these are really kind of zeroing in on those areas that need it the most. So like I said, at the end of the day, the corporate engagement is very real. AOF just announced working with the NBA and LegalZoom on some activities now. But the key to it all, I think, is the impact, right? Folks aren't just writing checks. They want to make sure that the money that they're participating in or the funds they're participating in are actually moving the needle.
Thanks, Chris. Angela, a business owner, an entrepreneur, you're in the process of, building and growing and reinventing your business. You are the intended beneficiary of a lot of these innovations that are happening in the market, not just by your fellow panelists, but lots of institutions in the space, obviously government. When you're thinking about your future, you talked about how you're optimistic. What is it that's most helpful to you as an entrepreneur and your fellow small business owners when it comes to these financing innovations?
For me personally, pre-pandemic, we were a small business. We were, a brick and mortar store. And post-pandemic, we're presenting more like a startup, right? We've created these highly scalable models. I didn't even talk about the work that we do with schools and for teachers and our online teacher portal. And it's made me realize that we're going to need capital to grow. And it's not something that I've ever had to confront up until this point. So having a better understanding of what those options are, beyond taking on more debt for businesses that had to pivot during the pandemic and find themselves in the position that I'm in, it would be really helpful. And just having connections to the kinds of capital that could help move us forward is essential. I think I'm not unusual and I've spoken to many small business owners who really who look completely different than who they were in March of 2020, and that is really would be really helpful.
Thanks, Angela. We have other audience questions that we just can't get to. I'm going to save one of those audience questions from Margaret Love for our task force discussion with Chris and Chris. Before we get a video message from our task force co-chairs, Angela, I want to thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Jamal, I want to thank you very much, and the American Investment Council for joining. And Chris Ledesma and Chris Pilkington are going to stay on for a very brief discussion of our task force. But right now, we're going to run a video from the co-chairs of DPC's new task force on the future of the Small Business Administration.
Good morning, Anne-Marie. Pleasure to work with you as a co-chair. Pleasure to work with other talented task force members as well. To introduce myself, I'm Pradeep Balor. I run a cybersecurity advisory firm in Northern Virginia. Previously, I served as Chief of Staff to Linda McMahon, the 25th Administrator of the SBA. Prior to SBA, I had a long career in Silicon Valley in corporate development.
Good morning, Pradeep. It's nice to see you, and I'm really happy to be working with you as well. My name is Anne-Marie Malum, and I currently serve on the board of directors of a commercial bank and on a fintech company that's in the lending space. Before that, my career was in banking, and the passion that I always had in that field was for business lending. I was surprised and pleased to be asked to join the SBA in the Obama-Biden administration, where I was the associate administrator of the Office of Capital Access. It was an eye-opener. It was a challenge. It was a thrill. I don't feel like I had enough time there. I'm very excited to be working with Pradeep and all of you in this task force that we're launching today to really utilize all of our perspectives. And we've got a great team here to try to focus some ideas and initiatives that really can help the SBA go forward in an efficient and strong manner. So with that, I will turn it back over to Pradeep.
As you know, Anne-Marie, since 1953, the Small Business Administration has been pivotal in providing access to capital as well as government contracts to small businesses all across the country. During the current pandemic, as you know, this SBA was called upon to almost provide $1 trillion in loans to small businesses, which served as a lifeline to many of these businesses during these very difficult times. And as you know, having served in SBA, just to put that in perspective, that's about 30 times what SBA lends in a fiscal year. Even though SBA did a very good job in providing this help to all of the customers, just the scale and magnitude of the effort highlighted several areas where things could be done much better. I think as part of this team, you're looking to see how we can focus on those opportunities and build SBA for a better future tomorrow.
I think, you and I are definitely on the same page here. We've had some good conversations. I also wanted to mention some of the strengths that we really want to build on that the SBA, does have. When I think of the SBA, I think of, you mentioned the amazing job it did with PPP, and it's a very small agency in terms of government agency sizes, and yet it's nimble enough still to make course changes and implement new programs like it did there. And I think one of the reasons that is possible is because the SBA has grown through the years in partnership with private business. It's not an agency that competes with private business. It works together with banks and lenders to make sure that businesses, small businesses that don't have guarantor family members and don't have collateral are able to get started in this country where the American dream has been at the foundation. I think that the program's ability to generate revenue, that the lenders pay for a guarantee fee, that's a fair fee that results in so much revenue that the SBA is really a very small line item when it comes to taxpayers having to pay the bill. And that's an important thing that we need to consider going forward. The last thing that I wanted to mention that I think is a wonderful strength too, that should be leveraged and protected. And that is that the SBA really enjoys so much support on the Hill from both sides of the aisle. It's not a partisan issue. Everybody wants small businesses to continue to thrive in this country. And so I think that's an amazing strength of the SBA as well.
And Anne-Marie, I think as you pointed out, SBA has support from both sides of the aisle. And one of the reasons for that support is that SBA has been managed in a very fiscally responsible way across many different administrations.
It's a challenge, but I'm excited about this group.
Yeah, likewise, Anne-Marie. I think I agree with you 100%, and I'm very excited about what we can do together across the aisle and make sure that SBA continues to provide its services to small business customers across the country.
Welcome back. Thanks to Anne-Marie. Thanks to Pradeep, not only for that video, but also for agreeing to co-chair PPC's new task force on the future of the SBA. Chris Ledesma and Chris Pilkerton have stayed on with us. They're both members of this task force. I just want to spend a couple of minutes asking each of you about this effort, about your participation, and maybe expand on some of the points that Anne-Marie and Pradeep made. just want to start with the why of the task force. We heard Anne-Marie, we heard Pradeep talk about this. Obviously, this is occurring right on the back of and in the tail end of COVID. Can you each, Chris Ledesma, I'll start with you. Can you just talk about kind of what's the opportunity at hand here, not just for the task force, but for the SBA and for government policy in general towards small business and entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I think it's first of all, thank you to the Bipartisan Policy Center for having me today and including me in the task force, and Chris working with you. Chris and I have actually met before as in visits to Washington, so it's good to see him and serve on this capacity with him and Anne-Marie and Pradeep as well. But this is a real opportunity. I think there's an axiom that I sort of live by, and we talk about a lot, which is never pass up a good opportunity from a crisis. This has presented a real opportunity for us coming out of the pandemic, seeing how the staff at SBA responded so well, how the industry responded by providing so many loans in a very difficult environment for everybody. But we learned a lot, and I think we talked a lot about on this panel about what small business owners learned, what we learned as an industry, where there's possible gaps and challenges, and where the SBA and this partnership that I've been in the SBA lending industry for 25 years, and through non-bank lenders as well as bank lenders. And I've learned that it is a really good program. It is a really good public-private partnership that's developed, and I think it's an enormous opportunity for us to have this moment in time when we can learn, where we can take expertise from across the industry, from across stakeholders and groups across the country, and get their feedback about what the SBA could be and what this relationship be in the future. So at Wells Fargo, we're extremely excited to partner with Bipartisan Policy Center on this. We're extremely excited to work with everybody on the task force and look forward to the work ahead.
Thanks, Chris. We're absolutely delighted to have you as part of the task force, and we're incredibly grateful for Wells Fargo support to help make it happen. Chris Pilkerton, you served at SBA. Now you're kind of on the other side in the Cdfi, occupying a very interesting space. I wonder if you could talk about the opportunity here, for SBA and for small business policy in general.
Yeah, and I echo everything that Chris said about my appreciation to be affiliated with BPC and this effort. As you mentioned, I was the general counsel and acting administrator at the SBA. And first and foremost, I agree that it is a bipartisan group that really enjoys that support and has some of the hardest working, public servants in the federal government or any state government for that matter. And I think, SBA truly has been the tip of the spear. My old boss used to say that her job was to make sure that SBA was no longer the best kept secret in government. And I think right now everyone knows that and appreciates that. And the important things that I think this program is going to look at in this task force, is not just the loan programs, which are incredibly important, but looking across the board, at government contracting and the SBIC program and the business advising programs. All of those things are critical to the ecosystem. And at the end of the day, trying to figure out, where there are efficiencies, and once again, that the bipartisan nature of this sort of bringing folks together, to enhance what is a incredibly supportive organization. When I was in the White House after I left SBA, I was speaking to a lot of governors and a lot of mayors in the March and April timeframe, and I said, what are the biggest issues you're facing right now? First and foremost, it was public health and safety during the pandemic. But almost immediately after that, it was access to capital and small business support. And so I think this organization and this task force is going to get a lot of support in its work, and I'm excited to be a part of it.
Thanks, Chris, and we're thrilled to have you a part of it as well. You've both preempted the additional questions I wanted to ask you about the task force. So I just want to end with real quick, ask you each to make a real quick comment. You've got an audience here. Some members of the audience who are still on are going to be those with whom the task force hopes to engage, both in and out of government. So I wonder if you might just comment really briefly. Chris Pilkerton, we'll stay with you. What can the public, what can government, what can small businesses expect from the task force over the next 12 months or so?
So I think, as I was just alluding to, looking at the SBA as a critical part of this recovery. And in the context of legislative activity and things that will occur over the next few months, how can SBA support those small businesses now and continue that tide of support over the long run, whether it's resources, whether it's changes or tweaks to the programs, but at the end of the day, continuing that bipartisan mission and supporting the small businesses. And when reaching out to folks that are going to be engaged as advising this group or providing expert feedback, I would welcome all comers. I think this has got to be an all hands on deck effort, because it's critical for our country. It's certainly critical for the agency, but it's critical for that person out there who's thinking, hey, should I start a small business, in the mix of everything that's happening now, and really being that leader and continue to be the tip of the spear for entrepreneurs.
Thanks, Chris. You framed that really well in terms of all hands on deck to help the agency and help boost its capacities to help the country and its small businesses. Chris Ledesma, final word to you. What can our audience, what can the stakeholders expect from this task force over the next year or so?
Yeah, thanks for giving me the final say, but I think lots of engagement. I think that's at least my goal. Being part of this is I would like to hear from others around what they think, where the SBA can go. And it's not just at the agency. I want to make sure I give my kudos to the team, the staff. I know many of them really well. We've worked really hard for the past 2 years in unprecedented times. But this is more about the partnership and the program and the mission that the agency has pushed around helping small businesses. And we need stakeholders. We need people in the communities and others with expertise in this area about how this program and the mission and the partnership, as Chris pointed out, that's what this program is all about. It's been a bipartisan issue for as long as I've been in it. And it's been one where people do rally around small businesses. And we need other voices to make sure we're engaged. We need to make sure we are as banks, how do we contribute to the relationship? As lenders, how do they contribute to the relationship with SBA? So it's not necessarily all about the SBA. It's about how we all interact with the agency and how we can all get better. So, and we need all voices in the room to help us do that.
Thanks, Chris. You both situate that incredibly well, and we're very appreciative for you both not just sticking around on the panel for this, but also serving on the task force. Thank you, everyone. I want to thank our other panelists, thank Congressman Foster, and thank you for watching this BPC event.